So yeah, good morning or good afternoon now. My name is David McIlreavy, like Sean said. Licensed digital site director with IAC. We're based in Cool County, Wicklow. Paul's pretty much tied up the north of the city, so I'd say I'd go south and find something more interesting to talk about. I'd just like to give thanks to Sean and Friends of Dublin for inviting me. And my partner and 17-month-old son, who've given their own particular insights on Cess and its development, because if you've got piling up nappies, you get to think about this thing a lot. So that's about it. We're going to our first item. There's going to be a bit of preamble in this. In 2011, BBC came up with this wonderful idea of a sort of documentary on dirt and how we process it in the modern world and its history. And they came up with this wonderful idea of scratch and sniff cards that went along. So you can thank your lucky stars that the budget didn't run to that. So, but it's something to bear in the future. You could look under your seats in future and find a scratch and sniff card. The subject of this talk runs around one single medieval feature, but will there be a bit of a discussion of how we actually got to that and how that fit into an overall site. And subsequent post-excavation works, including the artifactual, plant macro, and insect analysis, revealed a much more complex story than we thought would be originally there. Just going on saying that, in the world of discussing Cess and people who like to talk about this online, there's quite a lot of redevelopment of how this stuff is being treated in the archaeological sort of record. David Smith from Birmingham University, who actually did part of our analysis, is actually one of the people who's looking at this, and he's sort of gunning for a much more holistic approach to how we treat this stuff, and how cesspits are generally regarded by archaeologists sometimes as something we get through to get to something else, whereas there's a much more complex story of how these things are actually developing and may not actually just be including human waste. And he makes very interesting use of modern sort of data on this from diverse sources such as the US military and various aid organizations throughout the world who've done actually quite a lot of work on how you get your best use of your latrine pits and various other rubbish disposal. So I mean, it's a wide-ranging subject that's got its tendrils into everything. So if we go on, I just love this. This is David Smith's wonderful description and illustration. I think there's definitely a wallpaper company somewhere needs to make this for a lower bathroom somewhere. I've written to several people, but I haven't got any returns yet. So just going on then. So a good illustration of how features we term cesspits are usually presented, and they occasionally make their way into the odd sort of newspaper articles. And this is one outside London that was found in 2020, I think. And medieval treasures uncovered from the sludge of a cesspit, and that's how we tend to look at them generally. We find these things preserved in them, and we look at them and go, oh, wonderful, pots and things like that. But how it came to be a cesspit and what that involved tends to get sort of pushed to the back, slightly. And so you can see that in the side as part of the article. They just these wonderful pictures of a 13th century pair of spurs and condiment bowls and various. But throughout the entire description of it, there's very little discussion of what it actually was. You've got a very clean archaeologist and very clean walls, and everything's very sanitized, but it was a cesspit. So there would have been an interesting, filling up of it and how it was actually decommissioned. So just an introduction to the site. This is us in Francis Street. You can actually see the site's just ringed in red. The corn market and various other things, and we'll just come on to how busy this area is archaeologically. So in 2018, subject of archaeological monitoring and targeted excavation and advanced development. Like a lot of things in Dublin. Majority of the development was occupied by a theatre building in the Tivoli and its associated car parks, and you can see a bank of 19th century sort of modified housing that goes along the front onto Francis Street. The site lies in the zone of archaeological potential for Dublin City, and you can see from the Dublin City development map there, we're actually incredibly close to the city walls. It's actually nice to wander past one of the few remaining sections of it as you're going to work in the morning. Sort of focuses the mind slightly. You've got, it's very close to Newgate, which lay along the eastern end of what would be Thomas Street. One of the central arterial routes for the extensive western city suburb. And generally when we talk about or we look at Dublin City, we sometimes forget the bustling suburbs, even in this medieval city that developed, especially in this area. The Western City suburb combined a significant concentration of industrial, domestic, and particularly ecclesiastical activity. Not forgetting that was Abbey St. Thomas that Paul's given talks on. And you've got good summary in medieval Dublin, which you should all go and buy, like Sean said. My partner also did part of the analysis for the skeletons that was found recently at the same excavation that's coming out in the next one. So, I mean, Paul actually showed an illustration of Kells, County Kilkenny, just how big and how influential these abbeys could be. And you've got one of those sitting bang outside the walls of Dublin. And there's Stephen Collins' wonderful reconstruction of it. Like all good archaeological sites that you talk about, ours is here. So, you know, it's very convenient that I won't be able to show any pictures of it. There's no magpies, so it's fine. Two further important ecclesiastical foundations were found in the area. We'll just fly through those. A friary and hospital of the Crutch Friars immediately outside the Newgate, and the Franciscan Friary, maybe 100 meters to the south, that gave Francis Street its name. A routeway outside the city walls leading to what would be Thomas Street and the Newgate. It seems to have already existed, and Alan Hayden in 1992 found part of a metal surface underneath Francis Street that may be the original medieval surface of that street. By the 13th century, you've got burgage plots mentioned along Thomas Street. So you can actually see Thomas Street coming along here at the very top, and these long, narrow sort of burgage plot developments. Now, I'll talk about a little bit about them later on, but some of them may have been truncated by the actual development of this site. So what we're probably talking about is one is very, very long one going down the sort of side of it here, maybe actually more representative of what they would have looked like. Yep.
Stick close to the
Sorry,
microphone,
is that better?
Just for the purposes of the tape.
No problem.
Yep. You can just use that too.
Okay, perfect.
So,
Yep. Cool. Okay, well, these are just two maps from the initial desktop assessment, just showing how busy this area is in terms of archaeology. These are the SMR sites, sites and monuments records that are actually around it. I won't go through all the medieval, but yeah, you look at that first of all and you think, oh dear. And this is the actual archaeological excavations that have gone on in the area. Again, very, very busy. So we've a good idea of exactly what should be there and sort of our investigations so far in this area. In terms of site investigations on site, Claire Walsh in 2003 dug about 7 trenches there, and the artifactual material she got actually tied in a lot with what Antoine's got from his monitoring of works along Thomas Street. Walsh identified a couple of wooden posts running north-south in one of her trenches, surrounded by brushwood, and she postulated maybe signs of a revetment that was just north of where we'll be talking about. And monitoring of the site investigation trenches in 2016, we find that most of the archaeological areas are medieval areas that we're kind of interested in preserving. We're generally found at 14 meters OD. So as Paul and Myrn have stated, and there's a long process of getting involved with developers and getting involved with how these things are preserved. And we came to the idea that based on where we thought the archaeology was going to be, the depth, and also Claire Walsh's idea that there was stuff in this area, we came to an agreement that in order to preserve in situ as much of the potential medieval deposits, that the piling mats and the initial development clearance would only come to 14.6. So that should give us 0.6 of a meter to play with. Now, it's a lovely idea. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's more nerve-wracking. We put in 156 augured piles, and we use the English or historic England threshold for just how much the site was actually disturbed. And Paul put a lot of work in with DCC trying to make this cross the line. So yeah, a lot of our lives are spent looking at these sort of diagrams now. It's not just looking at cesspits, it's looking at how we can get around them. In 4 areas of proposed development, we couldn't actually get away with preserving those because lift shafts, things like that, actually go down a fair bit lower than the actual piling mat. So these were targeted for targeted excavations, and they were going to be fully preserved by record. So they would go straight down subsoil, all archaeological features preserved and taken out. 4 excavation areas, as I'll show, identify a number of features, generally 12th to 14th century in provenance, including northwest, southeast aligned ditch feature, truncated slot trenches, backfill wells, a couple of features associated with tanning, and 3 possible cesspits. And finally, we get onto what I should be talking about. That's just a an idea of where we took these 4 targeted excavations. Again, you can see where we've tried to not impinge on as much of the area as possible, and just take exactly what we need. This is the area we're talking about, and you can see sort of here is our 3 intercutting cesspits. The small building around it was actually post-medieval with a well built in the corner. We'll be talking about especially these as well. These are actually wooden struts across the cesspit, trying to stabilize it. Primary and secondary features, if we just go back, they were in this area. So you see that large area there that's intercut. That's because they were so heavily intercut you could really only make it out at the bottom which was which. And this is our 3rd pit that gave us most of our information. The pits are generally subcircular with rounded corners. The 3rd pit we're going to talk about actually had a light grey clay clinging to the sides and the base, probably to promote water retention. Upper 1/3 of the pits was reinforced on the west or the eastern side by a number of overlapping planks held in place by round wood elements that span the pit. And you can see those in place there. These are the round woods that went across the entire length of the pit. And there's just a close-up slightly of the wooden planking, which Lauren O'Donnell actually suggested maybe a reused revetment from a part of an old waterway or something. And that's it, finally cleaned up. So they put this reused strutting in because of the amount of intercutting. You can imagine digging a cesspit and then finding another one's leaking into it is not ideal. So that's what they've done here, but only the upper 1/3 was covered by this. And that's just an idea in section of what we had. This is our planking in place, but you can see the other decommissioned cesspit just beside it, capped in stone, and sort of an organic layer pressed in the top of it. But this one to the right is the one where most of our information came from. Base of fill pit, because this is a black peaty clay, we'll call it 245. Artifacts included 9 kilograms of bone and oyster shell, which was our post-ex department loved me bringing in. All mostly sheep and goat and split between butchery and hornworking waste in the immediate area. Also 86 pieces of leather and shoe, most of it cut up quite small, which is quite important, as we'll see. And 132 sherds of ceramic from one single layer, maybe only about this thick. 119 of which were Dublin type ware and Dublin type cooking wares, which is quite significant, the amount of material that actually came from that. Just an indication of some of the wonderful artifacts that came out of it. We had lovely globular bowls like these, and you can see that they're not smashed up, they're just thrown in. These things are, you can imagine they've been dropped on the floor and then just immediately thrown in. We also got some quite rare baluster type jugs that are also thrown in. There's some of the, you'll see some of the Dublin type wares Mern's already gone through. Quite highly decorated stuff as well. You get this idea that somehow these houses were just full of quite bland stuff, but people lived well. It's quite nice stuff to look at. Quite a lot of decoration. Also, we've got Dublin cooking ware. Again, quite a large vessel, probably about this size, thrown in. You can imagine someone again dropped it on the floor and just went getting rid of that. So overlying the basal, we had a black organic rich clay with mineralized elements. Now there were no finds or animal bone from this deposit, and 246, the immediate overlying, it was so similar. Some specialists suggested that it may actually be the same material, and all the artifacts have actually just sunk through. And this is sort of the upper dried out layer of our peaty material. They also suggested the compressed mineralized elements may be decomposition of bone and shell within a sort of a peaty environment, and it sort of results in these mineralized nodules. This was capped by another grey peaty layer, and that contained more ceramic, mostly again Dublin type ware, and 13 pieces of the same leather shoe, again cut up really small, and no bone. The final layer seems to be sealed deliberately with no bone or artifacts. So getting into it, whenever we start looking at these things, originally thought they were going to be what they call straddle pits. So basically, you can see, I don't have to explain how this works, but yeah, you can imagine that's a precarious position to be in most of your time. But by the time we started looking at it and we started looking through the layers, we realized it wasn't all the same material in it. And so we went back to our sort of environmental strategy for sampling, and we got in touch with Dave Smith and stuff from Birmingham, and we decided to take quite a focused and sort of intensive strategy just to see what was happening in here of plant and macro. The plant macro also included charred remains and waterlogged remains, so there was quite a lot of samples going back and forth. A summary of the plant macro. A summary suggests that most of the material was actually grassland plants, including plant stock and seed fragments, which Wendy Smith, who's actually associated with David Smith, said were actually indicative of hay and sort of animal feed hay almost. And a particular concentration of bracken was noted in one of the upper samples. Cereal chaff from barley, wheat, and oat was also recorded in all the samples, and a high concentration was noted in some of the higher ones. Examples of wild foods, what people have termed the medieval fruit salad of crab apples, blackberry, hazelnuts, bilberries, which we'll come on to, were all present in all three samples in various degrees. All could have originated as part of food waste, which we normally think of for cesspits, but I mean, there were pieces of wood and small pieces of twine mixed in. So some of the specialists suggest they may actually have been used for dyeing as well, especially blackberry and things like that. So you begin to get an appreciation that there are other things feeding into this pit that don't quite make sense. Some of the comparative work we looked at, there's no exotic foodstuffs such as figs, walnuts, and grapes in the entire thing, which we know were floating around Dublin, and you find them in cesspits. So, like I say, there's definite things happening. In terms of looking at just an illustration of it from a Czech document of people at the same period harvesting, I think it is crab apples. Other elements found within it include moss, eggshells, small quantities of fish bone, and they were recorded in all three samples. Interesting, whole poppy seeds and cereal bran was noted as well. Poppy seeds were known to be used as decoration and on top of pastry and things from York, and they can pass through the human gut unprocessed. So maybe an indication there is some actual proper human bodily waste going into this, but it's not the main thing. And the cereal bran would also be suggestive of that. The specialists noted that food waste inclusions could be used on other materials such as ash, which wasn't recorded, to sterilize cesspits and to heat up composting. And we'll go through that now. In terms of the insect analysis, also suggested rotting and decaying material and beetles associated with the decomposition of hay and that sort of environment. Higher concentration noted in the very, very low bases of the pit that were noticeably very peaty. This also may have come from settlement or stable waste, and is dry, mouldering hay that's been lying on a floor in a sort of wet environment. That's what you're talking about, and that formed the majority of what we found. The presence of cyanthropic beetle species, which were new to me, a number of human fleas, and also one dog flea. Just a large part of the material originated as human settlement waste, probably from floor clearances. So again, you've got a lot of hay coming in, a lot of species only associated with human and very close domesticated species. Other settlement indicators were the sawtooth beetle associated with highly decayed grain. One of the specialists suggests that maybe people were eating really low-grade grain in this area, but also you can mix that stuff with cow feed and your stable comes back into play again. So it may not, we've got a really poor diet for the humans, we've got maybe a moderately poor diet for the animals. And another of also beetle species were known to be associated with decaying hide, hair, and bone. So I mean, the insect analysis was fascinating in terms of what it could actually provide. Several fly species, and you're going to love this before lunch, were associated with extremely fluid excrement. So someone had a bad day, or this is a particular type of what we're including, and that's what they call a kelp fly or a seaweed fly, and these would have been particularly prevalent around this sort of waste. That's when they talk about sterilizing cesspits, that's what you're trying to get rid of, flies and things like that. In terms of synthesis, the pits, several possible sources of material have been identified, and I mean, it's clear from the outset that not just human bodily waste. This is someone's actually taking care to take this from several different areas. Possibility of cattle feed, large portion of material in the pit seem to have originated as hay, possibly as feed for cows. The reason we're going with cows is horse manure is really quite dry, but the really fluid stuff comes from your friendly cow. So if they're cleaning out byres in the back of houses and things like that, that could be where this is coming from. It could also explain the partially mouldering hay and spoilt grain, especially when you're trying to bulk out your hay supplies. You may actually add in grain that maybe wasn't fit for human consumption, but by all means, feed it to Daisy out the back. Unmodified buildings in Fish Amble Street Strike 5 in the Viking layers. Could be used as small biostructures within plots, and also closer to the present site, Coughlin in 2000 excavated a timber frame structure with a distinct sort of back room that could be used as a buyer. Do I need to shut this? Stop sharing? Do I need to stop sharing? Or
Oh, yeah, you can, no, just press
that's okay. That's grand. Okay, so domestic bedding also, high bracken signature within 245 or 246. One of the upper layers may actually be part of the human bedding, not the staple stuff that's gone in the very base of it. The presence of a notable amount of human flea and at least one dog flea was pointed out by the specialist is quite unusual. So whereas he's got lots of beetles associated with just lots of hay, very few human indicators, and now all of a sudden we have a concentration of human fleas and a dog flea, which you would imagine would be quite close to the humans. Domestic kitchen waste, significant amount of ceramic from the lower layers is significant periodic kitchen waste, and also the materials going in like crab apples and this fruit salad. But the high proportion of jug handles and body sherds may suggest this material originated from several different houses or areas. So you get this, it's almost like they're piling up their waste somewhere, and then this is eventually being collected of a small neighborhood and then brought to this processing area. The presence of signatures for wild foods, crab apple, shows the importance of these foods even to an urban population. And more exotic fruits is bilberry. It was gathered in the uplands of surrounding Dublin in the late summer. So this wasn't just something someone picked off a hedge in the local area. It was something that they actually was probably used for maybe pastries or something like that. It's been processed and the waste has been thrown in. Again, domestic waste continued. Animal and fish bones, whiting heron, some eel, fragments of eggshell, tiny little fragments, just a nice little indication there may have been chickens on the back. It's just a nice little snapshot of kitchen waste. And again, the point was raised that figs, walnuts, and grapes weren't present, which was used to possibly indicate that there may have been some kind of reduced social status to the people who are providing this material. And again, our friend human bodily waste, human poppy seeds and partly of well broken up bran and cereal elements suggest inclusion of some cess material, but this by all means was not the main material that was going on to this pit. And some industrial waste, we said about the leather, cut up really small, and majority of this material could be categorized as offcuts, and some of our specialists suggested may actually have not gone through the full leather tanning procedure. So it's not been oiled, it's not been formed into full shoes or anything like that. So identification of these various sources, what are we looking at? Peat-like consistency to the lower layers, inclusion of elements such as kitchen waste, encourages composting content, suggests these neighborhood materials have been deliberately collected and brought to one area for the production of possible compost. The collection of moulder and feed material mixed with cow excrement and the cleaning of buyers provide the basis. You imagine how much this material gets generated on a weekly basis. You need to find something to do with it, so why not actually use it? The addition of kitchen waste in the form of food waste, bones and plant material used to heat up the composting process. So once you've got your base layer of compost, any of you keen gardeners, you'll know you have to turn that pile and get that, get those organisms activated. The inclusion of ceramics of different size, there was a bit of a debate about what these could all be used for. We did a couple of different sizes of material, and like say almost whole pots as well. But it was suggested that some of these whole pots thrown in large areas, as they sank down through, would create air pockets and almost do the work of turning this material in the pit for yourself. Leather without metal inclusions may be broken up into small pieces, and it's several very strange websites that I've been on about organic composting. I'm saying you can't actually get leather, and if it's cut up really small, not got oils in it or metal, it can be actually mixed through. It will decay in various circumstances. Production of this material would be extremely important for medieval suburban dwellers. I mean, burgers plots had urban gardens in the back, and we can see that they're harvesting wild fruits as well. So they're obviously looking to produce as much as they can in their small areas, especially things like pulses take a heavy toll on fertility. So we've looked at what may be going into it, but what's the production capacity of a feature like this? It's a relatively small pit after all. Pit in this case would have been just maybe 4.93 cubic meters of compost if all the material was properly reduced. And that's an important thing in looking at this. The lower areas seem to be completely composted. The top are on their way to becoming compost. So it's again another indication this has been used over a relatively long period of time. Certainly be enough to supply at least one urban garden plot, if not a few used sparingly. But some medieval agricultural guides, which are immense fun to read, suggest that mixing the compost with topsoil and other soil before spreading would stretch the material further. They even suggest that maybe actually incorporating more benefit by doing it sparingly. A page from Walter of Henley, I'd recommend it. It's a rip-roaring read from the early 14th centuries in his husbandry book. He's one of the most significant agricultural works produced in England at the time. And he advocates openly the mixing of composting materials such as soil to regulate soil fertility, but also the use of neat manure to do things like fruit trees. So you're not wasting your compost on fruit trees that can take straight manure. So this stuff is being used in a very specific way. Mixing the completed compost in this way before spreading would stretch the material even further. We assume a 50-50 mix, which is what Walter seems to be suggesting. A garden meter plot of 8 meters in width based on suggested burgage width along Thomas Street of about 2 perches or 10 meters. You get then 10 meters cubed of compost mixed with soil, which could fertilize at least 3 of these plots to a depth of maybe 2 to 5 centimeters, which is what is recommended in modern. So you think from a relatively small pit, you begin to spread this stuff wider and wider, and it could be actually satisfying a neighborhood. In addition, texts such as Walter of Henley suggest the method need only be applied every 2 to 3 years. So you may even have a system whereby your neighbor gets it 1 year, you get another year, and that's how the system continues. In summary, current archaeological research on the subject of human waste, as I've said, David Smith and various other people have suggested that realignment of the present analytical techniques are needed. We're too focused mostly on the fancy pots that come out of these things and not the process and the materials that go in to make most of the sort of organics that include it. We tend to record it as just this was a layer of material, but we're not focused on how that gets developed. The identification of compost in the Tivoli site indicates an organized collection of range from disparate material. Again, a neighborhood is contributing to this. Who's responsible for collecting that? How are they all dipping into this, or is it just someone on private industry is taking it away and then providing it again? Agricultural texts of the period encourage the mixing of compost with soil before application, a 2 to 3 year repeat pattern, allowing for relatively sizable land to be treated. And again, is this just doing one neighborhood or is this a commercial venture? We need to, more research into what's actually happening there. There's still a substantial body of work to be done in the identification of similar features. A lot of stuff gets identified as Cess, but I think from what we've seen in the academic papers that have been noted and how these things actually develop, I think there's a more nuanced approach that can really take and how these things actually function. And construction of what David Smith refers to as biographies of Cess that reflect the complexity of their formation and use. You want to see less of the actual artifacts, which he terms the biographical, and that's more of a focus on how these things developed as sort of neighborhood applications. Unfortunately, there is the possibility that we're just all completely wrong, and that's what's happening. So yeah, thanks very much for that, and I hope it hasn't upset your lunch too much.